I didn't say a word when my daughter-in-law told her friends I was losing my mind. I didn't correct her when she started signing for packages at my address, as if her name was on the deed. And I didn't argue the evening she sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me, with a smile I can only describe as rehearsed, that it was time for me to consider other living arrangements. I just nodded, folded my napkin, and said I'd think about it. That was the last mistake she ever made with me. My name is Harold. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer before I retired, and in that time I learned one thing above everything else. The most dangerous structures are the ones that look stable from the outside. You don't know what's wrong until you study the foundation. I had studied mine very carefully. The house I live in, the house I built the down payment for, with 11 years of overtime shifts, sits on a quiet street in a suburb, outside Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a back porch my late wife Eleanor used to call her thinking spot. I still keep a wind chime out there, the kind she picked out at a craft fair in 2009. I can hear it from my bedroom on warm nights. My son Daniel moved in 4 years ago, after his apartment lease ended and he was in between jobs. I said yes without hesitating. He's my son. That's what you do. His wife, my daughter-in-law, came with him. Her name is Renee. In the beginning, it was fine. Renee was pleasant enough at Sunday dinners. She complimented my cooking, laughed at my old stories about job sites, asked about Eleanor with what seemed like genuine interest. Daniel seemed happy. I told myself this was going to work. The first sign I missed was small. About 3 months after they moved in, Renee rearranged the kitchen without asking. Not just the spice rack she moved. Eleanor's good mixing bowls to a high shelf I couldn't reach without a step stool. Replaced the dish towels Eleanor had embroidered and threw out a coffee mug that had been sitting in the same cabinet since 1987. When I mentioned it, she said she was just optimizing the space. Daniel shrugged and said it did look cleaner. I let it go. The second sign came when she started referring to the house as our place in conversations with neighbors. I heard her through the front window one afternoon telling the woman next door about our renovation plans. I had not been consulted about any renovation plans. I let that go too. The third sign I should have acted on, but didn't, was the afternoon I came home from a walk and found her mother sitting in Eleanor's chair on the back porch. Not visiting, sitting there with a cup of tea and a magazine like she owned the porch, the chair, and the wind chime. Renee introduced her casually, said she'd stopped by to see the place. Her mother looked around slowly and said, "It's smaller than I pictured, but it has potential." I smiled, offered to make more tea, went inside and stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment staring at the yard. That night I called my old college friend Ray, who had been a real estate attorney for 30 years before he retired to Scottsdale. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just asked some questions, the kind of careful, specific questions I'd learned to ask on job sites, when something didn't feel right, but I couldn't yet see the crack. Ray answered every one of them. I started paying closer attention after that, not in an obvious way. I wasn't following anyone around or going through their things. I simply became more present in my own home. I listened. I noticed. What I noticed over the next 2 months was a pattern. Renee began working from home full-time, which meant she was in the house while Daniel was at his office downtown. Her mother started coming by twice a week, then 3 times. Then there was a Tuesday afternoon I came back from my doctor's appointment and found both of her parents sitting in the living room watching television while Renee made lunch in the kitchen. Her father had his shoes off. When I walked in, Renee looked up with a brightness that felt slightly too wide and said, "Oh, Harold, you remember my parents?" I said, "Of course." Shook hands, asked if they wanted to stay for dinner. They did. A week after that, I overheard a phone call. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was coming down the stairs, and Renee was in the hallway below, speaking quietly but not quietly enough. I heard her say, "He barely uses the basement. There's a full bathroom down there. It's basically an apartment. They'd have their own space." A pause. "I know, but he's 67. He's not going to be here forever." I stopped on the stairs. "I'll handle it," she said. "Just give me a few weeks." I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Not angry. Something quieter than anger. The feeling you get when a calculation you already suspected turns out to be correct. I called Ray again that same evening. I want to be clear about something before I continue. Daniel is not a bad person. He is, in the way that some good people are, a person who takes the path of least resistance inside his own home. He didn't plan any of this. He probably didn't know the specifics of what Renee was arranging, but he had watched her take over that kitchen, watched her invite her parents over without asking me, watched her gradually edge me toward the margins of my own life, and he had said nothing. He chose quiet over honesty, and that choice has consequences. The conversation happened on a Thursday evening in October. Daniel was there too, which told me this had been planned in advance. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one Eleanor and I bought at an estate sale in 1998, and Renee did most of the talking. She said she'd been thinking about what would be best for everyone. She said that her parents were getting older and needed more support. She said the basement could be converted into a really lovely in-law suite. She used the phrase in-law suite 3 times. Then she said that she'd done some research into independent living communities in the area, and that there was one about 12 minutes away that had an excellent reputation. Very active social calendar, shuttle service, the whole picture. She slid a brochure across the table. I looked at it, looked at Daniel. He was studying the table. I asked, "Whose name is on this mortgage?" Renee said that wasn't really the point. I said, "I think it is." She said they weren't talking about ownership. They were talking about what made sense for the family going forward. And wasn't I getting a little tired of maintaining such a large property on my own? I told her the property maintained itself just fine, and that I had a lawn service and a very good plumber. There was a silence that had weight to it. Then Renee said carefully that she hoped I wouldn't make this difficult. I looked at her for a moment. Then I picked up the brochure, folded it in half, and put it in my shirt pocket. I told them both I appreciated them sharing their thoughts, and that I'd take the weekend to consider everything. I went to bed at 9 o'clock. I did not sleep right away. I lay in the dark listening to the wind chime on the porch and thought about Eleanor, about the years she and I had spent in this house, about the Saturday mornings with coffee on that porch, about the way she used to leave notes in the kitchen when she went to the grocery store, even though she'd only be gone an hour. The house was full of her, in the way that a place is full of someone who loved it for a long time. I thought about Ray's advice, about what he had told me was possible, and what it required, and how much time I had been given without knowing it. I got up at 6 the next morning and made phone calls. What I am about to explain requires a little patience, but I want you to understand it fully because the details matter. I had owned that house outright for 9 years. Eleanor and I paid off the mortgage in 2016. 2 years before she passed. The deed was in my name alone. When Daniel moved in, we had no formal rental agreement. I never charged him rent, which meant legally. He and Renee were guests in my home. Long-term guests, but guests. Ray had made sure I understood this distinction during our first conversation. He had also told me something else during our second conversation, the night of the phone call I'd overheard on the stairs. He told me that if I chose to sell the house, I could do so at any time, to anyone, with no requirement to notify or obtain permission from the people living in it, as long as I followed proper legal procedure for requiring them to vacate. In Ohio, that procedure involves written notice. The standard notice period for a non-paying occupant is 30 days. Ray connected me with a colleague of his, a real estate attorney named Patricia, who operated out of a firm in downtown Columbus. I met with Patricia on the Friday morning after the Thursday conversation. I told her everything. She asked clear, direct questions. I answered them. Over the following 3 weeks, I did what I had always done on complicated engineering projects. I worked quietly. I documented everything, and I did not announce my plans to anyone who might interfere with them. I had already been thinking about selling for some time. The house was bigger than I needed. Eleanor was gone. The neighborhood had changed in ways that were mostly fine but sometimes lonely. I had a brother in Asheville, North Carolina, who had been asking me for 2 years to consider moving closer. The real estate market in Columbus that fall was strong. Patricia listed the house on a Tuesday. Within 11 days, I had 3 serious offers. I accepted one from a couple, a young family with 2 children who offered slightly above asking, and had a pre-approval letter that made Patricia nod appreciatively. I signed the purchase agreement on a Thursday morning. That same afternoon, Patricia prepared the formal written notice for Daniel and Renee. 30 days. Legal, proper, and correct in every detail. Now, during these 3 weeks, I had behaved entirely normally at home. I ate breakfast in the kitchen. I watched the news in the evenings. I was pleasant at dinner. I asked Renee once how her work was going. She told me. I nodded. I did not mention Patricia, or the listing, or the young family who had walked through the house on a Saturday afternoon, while Daniel and Renee happened to be visiting her sister in Cleveland. I want to be honest. There was one moment during those weeks when I almost said something. It was a Sunday evening when Daniel made chili, my recipe, the one I taught him when he was 14, and we ate together at the kitchen table, just the two of us. Renee having gone to bed early, he told me about a project at work he was proud of, and I told him it sounded like something his mother would have loved hearing about. He got a little quiet at that, said he missed her. I said I did too. We sat with that for a minute, and I thought about how simple it would have been for things to be different if he had just been honest with me. If he had just said, "Months ago, Dad, Renee and I are worried about you managing the house alone," we could have had a real conversation. I would have listened. I might even have agreed that it was time to think about a change, but he had chosen to follow Renee's strategy instead, and strategies have outcomes. The night Patricia filed the paperwork, I slept better than I had in months. I did not deliver the notice myself. Patricia sent it by certified mail, as required, to the address which was also, of course, my address. It arrived on a Monday morning. I happened to be in the kitchen when Renee came downstairs, saw the envelope on the counter, and opened it. I watched her read it. I watched the change move across her face in stages: confusion first, then a sharp focus, then something I can only describe as a recalculation happening in real time. She looked up at me. I was pouring coffee. I looked back at her. Waited. She said, "What is this?" I said, "It's a 30-day notice of required vacation of the premises. My attorney can explain anything that's unclear." She said, "You sold the house." I said I had. She said, "Without telling us." I said that was correct, that I wasn't legally required to, and that she may recall I had been asked to consider other living arrangements, which I had done, and these were the arrangements I had considered. She stared at me. I finished pouring my coffee, added 1 sugar the way I always do, and went to sit on the back porch. The conversation with Daniel happened that evening, and was harder. He was, I think, genuinely shocked, not at the fact of it, but at the fact that I had done it quietly, without anger, without a confrontation. I think he had expected, if I were going to respond at all, that I would shout, that I would threaten, that there would be an argument he could manage, or a position he could negotiate. There wasn't. I told him he had 30 days, that I hoped he would use the time wisely, and that I loved him, and that would not change. He tried to say several things. He got through most of them. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I told him again that I loved him, and that the 30 days stood. He asked where I was going to go. I told him Asheville. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Mom always liked Asheville." I said, "I know." She picked it. It turned out Renee had, in the weeks I was quietly working with Patricia, been telling her parents about the basement plan. She had been specific. She had apparently described the renovations she intended to make, the furniture arrangement, the way they'd have their own entrance through the side door. Her parents had, from what Daniel told me later, already started mentally moving in. When Renee told them about the 30-day notice, her mother reportedly said, "But where are we supposed to go?" I didn't hear this directly. I heard it from Daniel, who told me about a month later, after things had settled. He said it without humor, but I noticed he didn't quite meet my eyes when he said it, and I thought I saw something in his expression that might, eventually, become understanding. The closing happened 6 weeks after I accepted the offer. The young family, a couple named the Garcias, with a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, walked through the house one final time. On a bright November morning, the little girl ran her hand along the porch railing and asked her mother if she could have the bedroom with the window seat. I showed her it opened onto a view of the backyard maple that turned red every October. She said it was her favorite color. I took the wind chime down carefully before I left, wrapped it in the same cloth Eleanor had used when we moved in back in 1991. It's hanging on the back porch of my brother's house in Asheville now. And on warm nights I can still hear it from my bedroom. Daniel called me a week after I arrived in Asheville. It wasn't a long call, but it was honest, which was more than I'd expected. He said he'd been thinking about things, and that he knew he hadn't handled the situation well. He didn't make excuses. He said he was sorry. I told him I accepted that, and I meant it. He asked if we could visit sometime. I told him Asheville was a nice drive, especially in the spring, and that my brother had a good guest room. He said he'd talk to Renee. I said that was fine. I don't know what the future looks like for the two of them. I don't spend a lot of time on that question. What I know is that I am sitting on a porch in the mountains, in a rocking chair my brother refinished last summer, with a cup of coffee that has exactly 1 sugar in it, listening to Eleanor's wind chime in the November air. A 67-year-old man doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He just needs to know where the foundation is, and to wait for the right moment to show everyone else. I waited. I had all the time in the world,